Let me paint you a picture. The sky over Chicago decided to take a big, fat leak. Not a drizzle, not a shower, a full-on Old Testament, 40 days and 40 nights kind of deluge. The wipers on my rig, the Porkchop Express, were slapping back and forth so fast that they looked like they were trying to applaud. But they weren't doing a damn bit of good. Driving down I-190 toward O'Hare was like piloting a submarine through dirty dishwater. Every time a car went by in the other direction, it was like a tidal wave hitting the windshield, a total whiteout for a second that made your guts clench. This wasn't just rain. It was a personal insult from God himself, like he'd lost a bet and was taking it out on the greater metropolitan area. I'd just dropped a full load of premium Iowa bacon in Schaumburg, and I was feeling like $1 million, minus taxes. The rig was light, my gut was rumbling for a victory burger, and the only thing on my agenda was finding a truck stop with a grill that wasn't afraid of using extra cheese. A man needs his rewards, and mine usually come on a sesame seed bun, dripping with grease and American-made glory. The Porkchop Express, my noble Peterbilt 389, felt different when she was empty. She was frisky, responsive. Without 40,000 pounds of cured pork holding her down, she felt like she wanted to run. She was a thoroughbred without a jockey, all muscle and chrome itching for an open road. But the weather had other plans. The air, which had been thick and soupy all day, had finally broken. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 5 minutes, and the heavens opened up. The whole world went from a sticky summer afternoon to a cold, angry November night in the time it takes to light a smoke. The horizon just vanished behind a solid wall of gray. Traffic was crawling. Idiots in their little four-wheelers were hydroplaning all over the place, their brake lights flashing in a panic, little red strobes of fear. They skittered around like water bugs on a pond, no idea how to handle the weight of their own tiny vehicles. Me? I was sitting high and dry in my rolling fortress, king of the road, listening to the thunder crack and feeling the whole cab vibrate with every boom. The engine hummed its low, comforting diesel song under my feet, a deep baritone that told me everything was all right. It's times like that you feel invincible, a 300-pound man in a 20-ton machine. You're not just in traffic, you're a geological event happening to traffic. Come at me, Mother Nature. I got more horsepower than you got rain. I was feeling cocky, feeling good, tapping my fingers on the wheel to the beat of an old rock song on the radio. That's when I saw her, a flash of navy blue against the bleak gray curtain of rain. She was on the shoulder, standing next to one of those dinky little rollerboard suitcases. She wasn't trying to flag anyone down. She wasn't waving her arms or doing a desperate dance. She was just standing there, defeated, getting absolutely positively annihilated by the downpour. Cars were throwing up rooster tails of filthy water that slammed into her, a fresh assault every few seconds, but she didn't even flinch. It was like she'd just given up, accepted her fate as the newest resident of Lake Michigan. Her shoulders were slumped, her head bowed just a little, a portrait of pure, unadulterated misery. Even through the sheets of rain and the smeared windshield, I could tell she wasn't your average person. She had a posture, you know the kind. Straight spine, shoulders back, chin up, even in defeat. It's the kind of posture that costs money, that gets taught in some fancy school where they teach you how to walk with a book on your head. Even soaking wet and miserable, she looked elegant. I got a little closer, the big diesel engine humming a low growl, and the picture came into focus. My foot eased off the accelerator, the big rig slowing without me even making a conscious choice. My body knew what my brain hadn't processed yet. This was an anomaly, A diamond in a mud puddle, a flight attendant. No doubt about it. The uniform was a dead giveaway. A sharp little jacket and skirt combo, a silk scarf at her neck, now plastered to her skin like a wet noodle. Her hair, probably once in a perfect tight bun, was a complete mess of wet strands clinging to her face and neck, dripping onto her jacket. The dark hair was turning black with the water. She was staring blankly at the traffic, water streaming down her face, and I couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. Probably both. A woman like that doesn't end up on the side of the interstate unless her day has gone completely to shit, rolled over, and then been set on fire. My heart, a gristly old organ that usually only beats faster for bacon or a perfectly cooked steak, did a little two-step. A damsel in distress. Not just any damsel either. A high-class, top-shelf, 5-star damsel. The kind you see in movies. The kind that always smells like expensive flowers and looks at you like you're a barbarian. And maybe I am, but I'm a helpful barbarian. My philosophy has always been simple. If she's pretty, she's probably worth the trouble. And this woman looked like she was worth a whole fleet of tow trucks. Most truckers would have kept on rolling. Common sense screams it at you. A woman on the side of the interstate, especially near a big city airport, is usually a flashing neon sign that says, trouble. Could be a setup, could be a scam, could be she's crazier than a shithouse rat. Your brain tells you to mind your own business, keep your eyes on the road, and think about that cheeseburger. But me? Sam McCarty. I've always had a soft spot for trouble, especially when it comes in a package that fine. Besides, the way the rain was plastering that uniform to her body was making a very compelling argument. It was a civic duty, really, a public service. I was practically a first responder. What the hell? I grumbled to the empty cab. My cheeseburger could wait. This was a rescue mission. I flicked on my hazards, the thump-thump-thump of the blinkers starting a new rhythm in the cab, a counterpoint to the wiper's frantic beat. I eased my rig onto the shoulder, the massive tires crunching on the gravel, spitting rocks. The air brakes let out a deafening that cut through the roar of the storm and probably scared the hell out of her. The whole world seemed to shudder as the 18-wheeler settled. I watched her in my giant side-view mirror, a distorted little figure in a world of water. She didn't move at first. Then her head slowly turned. She looked at the massive chrome grille of my truck, a wall of polished metal and angry lights, then up at the cab, like it was an ark that had just pulled up to save her from the flood. Her face was a mixture of fear and hope, a cocktail I found surprisingly intoxicating. I leaned my big frame across the passenger seat, the worn leather groaning in protest under my weight, and cranked the handle for the window. It whined like a little bitch, fighting me the whole way, but it opened. A blast of cold, wet air, and the smell of rain on hot asphalt filled the cab, chasing away the familiar scent of old coffee and diesel. It was a clean, sharp smell, the smell of the world getting a bath. "Who looks like you're having a worse day than me?" I yelled over the storm, trying to sound friendly, and not like the ogre I probably looked like from down there, a big bearded face peering out of a metal monster. She took a hesitant step closer, squinting up at me, shielding her eyes with a hand that did absolutely nothing against the deluge. Water dripped from her chin, from her nose, from the tips of her eyelashes. "You could say that," she yelled back, her voice surprisingly strong, not thin and reedy like I expected. It had a nice timbre to it, even strained, a voice that was used to being heard over the roar of jet engines. My crew bus left without me, and every taxi I call cancels because of the storm. "Destination O'Hare," I hollered, feeling the rain spray my face even from inside the cab. It was cold and felt like tiny needles on my skin. "United Terminal," she shouted, her voice laced with desperation. "Well, get your fine ass in here before you drown," I said, with a grin I hoped she could see. "The heater works better than the wipers." For a second, she hesitated. I saw it in her eyes, even from 20 feet away. A quick, frantic calculation. A big, scary truck. A big, scary-looking driver. The smell of diesel and old coffee wafting out the window. It's the look every woman gives a trucker before she decides if he's a gentle giant or a headline on the 10 o'clock news. She looked back at the road, at the endless spray of water from passing cars that were soaking her to the bone. Another sedan blasted past, sending a sheet of brown water up to her waist. She flinched hard. Then she looked back at me, at the promise of a warm, dry cab. It was an easy choice. "Thank you," she shouted, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief washing over her face, making it beautiful even under all that grime and water. And then the real show started. She grabbed her little suitcase, which looked ridiculously small next to my tires, and trudged through the river running along the shoulder. The wind whipped a gust of rain so hard it was nearly horizontal, and she fought against it, her little uniform jacket flapping open. She reached the door and pulled on the handle. Nothing. The wind was pressing it shut, holding it tight against the frame like a stubborn clam. I leaned over, my gut pressing against the steering wheel, and shoved the door open from the inside with my shoulder. It flew open with a bang, and she stumbled back a step, surprised by the force. "It's a fighter!" I yelled. She gave a weak, waterlogged laugh and started the climb. And brother, what a climb it was. It's 3 steep steps up into the cab of a 389. It's a ladder, not a staircase. She put one foot, clad in a sensible but now ruined heel, on the first step. To get her leg up that high, she had to hitch up her skirt. The navy blue fabric was so wet it was like a second skin, and when she lifted it, it clung, revealing the long, pale line of her thigh and the top of her stockings. My breath caught in my throat. It was a single, perfect moment. A masterpiece of motion and anatomy against a backdrop of gray misery. That one image was worth missing 1,000 cheeseburgers for. She hauled herself up, step by step, a graceful mess of wet limbs and sheer determination. On the second step, her heel slipped on the wet metal, and she let out a little gasp. For a second, I thought she was going to fall, and I instinctively reached out a hand. But she caught herself, her hand gripping the grab bar like her life depended on it. Finally, she swung herself into the passenger seat, landing with a wet squelch on the leather. She was a drowned angel, and she had just landed in my heaven. She pulled the heavy door shut, and the roar of the storm was instantly muffled, replaced by the low rumble of the engine and the frantic beat of the wipers. The world outside vanished. The cab, my personal rolling kingdom, suddenly felt incredibly small, incredibly intimate. It was her, the water she brought in with her, and the scent that came off her in waves. It was a mix of rain, expensive-smelling perfume, something floral and fancy, like roses, and maybe something spicier, like sandalwood, and something else, something uniquely female. The air was so thick with it I could taste it on the back of my tongue. Water was dripping from her everywhere, her hair, her clothes, her hands. A small puddle was already forming on the rubber floor mat at her feet. She was shivering, her teeth chattering softly, a rhythmic clicking that was somehow louder than the engine. "Jesus," I said, my voice coming out a little rougher than I meant. "You're soaked to the bone." I reached over and cranked the heat up to full blast. The fans roared to life, sending a jet of hot, dry air directly at her. She audibly sighed in relief, closing her eyes and leaning into the blast, a flower turning toward the sun. "I'm Veronica," she said, her voice trembling a little from the cold. She tried to push a wet strand of dark hair out of her face, but it just stuck to her fingers. "Sam," I said, my eyes drawn against my will to her blouse. The crisp white fabric was now completely transparent. I could see the perfect, delicate outline of her bra, a lacy, dark-colored thing that seemed far too fancy for a Tuesday. My mouth went dry. My brain was short-circuiting. I was supposed to be a gentleman, but my eyes were traitors. I could see the pattern of the lace, the way it hugged her curves. This was a whole different level of visual information than I was used to. "Veronica," I said, forcing my gaze away from her chest and back to her face. It took a serious effort of will, like pulling my truck out of deep mud. "Let's get you warmed up." Steam began to rise from her clothes as the heater did its work. Little wisps of vapor danced off her shoulders and arms. The windows, already a little foggy from the humidity, began to completely mist over, starting from the edges and creeping inward like a curtain being drawn. We were being sealed in, just the two of us, in a warm, rumbling box, surrounded by the storm. This was going to be a hell of a lot more interesting than a cheeseburger. The heat was blasting, a roaring dragon breathing fire into the small space, and the cab was turning into a Florida swamp in August. Veronica had stopped the violent shivering, but her clothes were still plastered to every curve. She kept tugging at the hem of her wet skirt, which had ridden up her thighs, and pulling at the collar of her see-through blouse, a futile gesture of modesty that was driving me absolutely, certifiably insane. Every little adjustment just drew my eyes back to what she was trying to hide, like a magician waving a flag to distract you from the trick. This is very kind of you, Sam," she said, her voice still a little shaky but stronger now. I don't know what I would have done. I think my phone was about to die. "Hey, no woman left behind. That's the trucker's code," I lied smoothly. "There's no trucker's code. The only code is get paid, and don't hit anything expensive." But she didn't need to know that. She needed a hero, and for the price of a little gas, I was happy to play the part. Besides, watching you get sprayed by passing cars was just sad. It was starting to look like one of those car wash videos, but with less soap and more misery. She managed a small, genuine smile. It transformed her face. The misery melted away, and I saw the woman underneath. Bright eyes, a perfect set of teeth. I think I passed sad about 10 minutes ago and was heading straight for tragic. I chuckled, a low rumble in my chest. I liked her. She had a sense of humor, even when she was looking like a drowned rat, a very, very sexy drowned rat. The kind of rat that makes you want to build a better mousetrap, if you know what I mean. The steam rising off her was mixing with her perfume, creating a dizzying, intoxicating cloud of scent. It was like a flower shop in a sauna. The windows were almost completely opaque now. I could barely make out the flashing lights of a police car on the other side of the highway. It felt like we were in our own little world, a bubble of heat and humidity, totally isolated from everything else. "Look," I said, making a decision that was equal parts gentlemanly concern and pure selfish desire. "You can't sit in those wet things. You'll catch your death. And frankly, the steam is going to short out my radio. I need my tunes." She looked down at herself, really looked for the first time. She saw the transparent blouse, the way the dark lace of her bra was stark against the white fabric. She saw the skirt clinging to her thighs. A deep blush crept up her neck, a stark, beautiful contrast to her pale, cold skin. "I don't really have a choice," she said, her voice small. "Yeah, you do," I said, my voice low and steady. I jerked my thumb toward the thick gray curtain behind my seat. "I got a whole life back there. Bedroom, kitchen, closet. Got a clean t-shirt. It ain't exactly Chanel, but it's dry, and it's a hell of a lot bigger than what you're wearing." Her eyes widened. They were a deep, stormy gray, just like the sky outside. She looked from me to the curtain and back again. The implication hung in the air between us, thick as the fog on the glass. For her to put on my shirt, she'd have to take off her uniform, right here. In the cab of my truck, with me sitting 3 feet away. "Oh, I couldn't," she stammered, her modesty kicking in. Her hands crossed over her chest instinctively. "Why not? It's either that or we have to squeegee the inside of the windows," I said, trying to make a joke of it, to lighten the mood. "Come on, I'm a perfect gentleman. I'll keep my eyes on the very interesting and blurry road ahead." I gestured vaguely at the wall of white that was my windshield. It was like staring at a frosted beer mug. "I'll count to 100 if you want, or whistle a tune. Whatever makes you comfortable." She bit her lower lip, a classic sign of internal debate. Her teeth worried the soft flesh, and I found myself staring at her mouth. The heater roared. A drop of water that had been clinging to the tip of her nose finally let go and fell, landing with a tiny splash on her knee. She looked so miserable, so cold, and yet so damn alluring. "Okay," she whispered, the word barely audible over the engine and the fans. "Okay, thank you. Atta girl." I made a big show of turning my body away, planting my left elbow on the door and resting my head on my hand, facing the driver's side window. I put my other arm up on the steering wheel, creating a physical barrier. "I'm not looking. Scout's honor. I was never a scout. I got kicked out of Webelos for trying to trade my knot-tying manual for a comic book. I stared intently at the condensation on the glass, trying to trace patterns in the water droplets with my eyes. I heard the rustling behind me, the soft, slick sound of wet fabric pulling away from wet skin. A quiet, breathy sigh. My heart was pounding like a drum solo at a rock concert. My ears, though. My ears were working overtime, picking up every tiny detail, painting a picture far more vivid than my eyes ever could. I heard the tiny pop, pop, pop of the buttons on her blouse coming undone. My imagination, a filthy and powerful beast, went into overdrive, painting a vivid picture of the lacy bra I'd seen, the smooth, pale skin of her back. I imagined her fingers, nimble and sure, working the buttons free one by one. Then I heard a zipper, a low, slow, agonizingly deliberate zip. The skirt. Lord have mercy. I could picture it sliding down her legs, pooling at her ankles. I heard another soft sound, a wet schluck, as the damp fabric was peeled away from her skin. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to be a gentleman. I really, truly was. But then I made a mistake, a terrible, wonderful mistake. I opened them again, and I saw her reflection. It wasn't a clear picture. It was a ghostly, distorted image in the fogged-up passenger window, like a watercolor painting, a silhouette. But it was enough. It was more than enough. I saw the shadow of her arms as she peeled off the damp blouse. I saw the outline of her slender torso, the delicate curve of her waist. Then I saw her silhouette bend at the waist as she worked off the wet skirt. For a heart-stopping moment, she was just a shape in lace underwear, a perfect female form rendered in shadow and light. It was art, the kind of art they'd kick you out of a museum for staring at too long. My throat was sandpaper. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight. My knuckles were white. The leather creaked under the pressure. "Can you, hand me the shirt?" Her voice came, small and vulnerable, from behind me. I fumbled behind me without looking, my big hand patting the edge of the sleeper bunk like a blind man. "It's, right on the bed. Just reach through the curtain." I heard her lean back, the curtain rustling as she reached through. More quiet sounds of movement. Then the most intoxicating sound of all, the soft, whispering rustle of dry cotton as she pulled my T-shirt over her head, the sound of salvation. A moment later she spoke, her voice stronger now, warmer. "Okay, you can look now." I turned around slowly, like I was defusing a bomb. I didn't want to seem too eager, and there she was. She was sitting in the passenger seat, wearing my old faded gray T-shirt. It was a big shirt, an XXL, because, well, look at me. On her, it was a tent, a dress. But it was also short. The hem fell to about her mid-thigh, giving her the longest-looking legs I had ever seen in my life. They were pale and perfect, stretching out from under the gray cotton. The worn fabric was soft, and it draped over her curves, hinting at the shape underneath without revealing anything, which was somehow a million times sexier. Her wet hair was slicked back from her forehead. Her face was scrubbed clean by the rain, and her feet were bare, tucked up on the seat. She had transformed. She went from a polished, buttoned-up professional into something wild, natural, and 100 times more dangerous. She looked like she had just rolled out of my bed, not climbed out of a thunderstorm. "It's a little big," she said, a shy smile playing on her lips as she tugged at the hem, a gesture that only made her legs look even longer. "Looks better on you than it ever did on me," I said, my voice a low growl. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her legs. "Way better." She had tucked her wet uniform into a neat, sad little pile on the rubber floor mat. The cab was still an oven, but the heat felt different now. It wasn't just the heater anymore. It was coming from us. The air was electric. The storm outside raged on, but the real tempest was right here, inside the Pork Chop Express. We sat there in a charged silence for a minute. The only sounds were the steady rumble of the engine, the relentless drumming of the rain, and the frantic thump-thump-thump of the wipers fighting their losing battle. The storm showed no signs of letting up. We were trapped, and I didn't mind one bit. "So," she said, breaking the quiet. She tucked her legs up onto the seat, hugging her knees to her chest in a defensive, yet incredibly alluring pose. The motion made my T-shirt ride up another precious inch, and I almost swallowed my tongue. "This is cozy." "One of the perks of the job," I said, trying to get my brain to form coherent sentences again. "A mobile apartment, got a bed, a mini-fridge, everything a man needs." "And a spare wardrobe, apparently," she said, a playful glint in her eyes. The shyness was gone, replaced by something bolder. "You rescue a lot of drenched women?" "You're the first," I admitted, a slow grin spreading across my face. "Usually it's just stranded motorists with flat tires, and they're never as pretty as you. Mostly bald guys named Stan." The blush came back to her cheeks, but this time it was accompanied by a genuine smile. "You're very kind." "I'm just honest." I watched as she ran a hand through her wet hair, trying to comb the tangles out with her fingers. Her nails were painted a deep, classy red. A perfect detail. Everything about her screamed elegance, even now, wearing my ratty old T-shirt with a cartoon pig on it that said, "Go whole hog." "It's really coming down out there," she murmured, looking at the watery, distorted view through the windshield. A particularly violent gust of wind hit the side of the rig, and the whole cab shuddered with a loud groan. She jumped a little, her eyes wide. "She's sturdy," I said, patting the dashboard like it was a faithful dog. "She can handle a little wind." "You handle her pretty well," she said, her eyes dropping to my hands on the steering wheel. "All this machinery, it's impressive." The compliment was simple, but the way she said it, her voice low and soft, made it sound like she was talking about something else entirely. The air crackled with unspoken meaning. "Years of practice," I said, my voice thick. I flexed my fingers on the wheel. "You get a feel for it, when to push it, when to ease off the throttle, how to shift gears without grinding 'em." Her gray eyes met mine, and they were smoldering. "I bet you do." Holy hell, the game was on. The innuendo was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it on a cracker. To distract myself, to do something, anything, other than stare at her. I glanced down. "Your purse," I said, pointing to where it had fallen on the floor. "It tipped over in the climb." "Oh." She looked down. Her small, expensive-looking leather purse had spilled its guts all over the floor mat. A wallet, a phone, keys, a dozen different tubes and compacts of makeup. A woman's entire life scattered at my feet. "I'll get it," she said, starting to uncurl herself. No, I got it," I insisted, seeing an opportunity for something. Proximity. We both leaned down at the same time. It was a disaster of forced intimacy. The space between the seats was not designed for two people, especially not one of my size. My shoulder pressed hard against her bare thigh. The skin was warm and impossibly soft. Her hair, smelling of rain and apples from her shampoo, brushed against my cheek. Our heads were inches apart, upside down, as we stared at the mess on the floor. "Sorry," I grunted, my face turning red. I could feel the heat of her skin right through the denim of my jeans. My entire side was on fire. "It's okay," she whispered, her breath warm against my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. We started picking things up. My big, clumsy fingers fumbled with a lipstick tube, the cap clicking off. Her slender, graceful ones scooped up a powder compact. Our hands brushed as we both reached for her phone. A jolt of pure, high-voltage electricity shot up my arm. We both froze, our fingers intertwined for a split second over the dark screen of her phone. We looked at each other. Her face was right there. I could see the tiny droplets of water still clinging to her eyelashes. I could see the faint constellation of freckles across her nose. Her eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted. The roar of the storm outside, the rumble of the engine, it all faded to a dull hum. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears, a frantic, heavy beat. We stayed like that for a beat too long, crouched in the footwell of my truck, tangled up together like a couple of teenagers in a closet. Then, as if by some unspoken agreement, we both pulled back. We sat up straight in our seats, both of us breathing a little too fast. She clutched the rescued contents of her purse to her chest, like a shield. I gripped the steering wheel like it was a life raft in a hurricane. "Well," she said, her voice a little breathless, a little shaky. "That was close quarters." "Yeah," I croaked, my voice cracking. "Gotta be careful. It's a long way down." She laughed, a low, throaty sound that did things to my insides that no cheeseburger ever could. "I'm starting to think the most dangerous part of this storm is right here inside this truck." She wasn't wrong. The heat, the confinement, the smell of her, the sight of her in my shirt. It was a potent, explosive combination. I was a powder keg, and she was flicking matches at me. She shifted in her seat, turning to face me more directly. She let her legs uncurl, stretching them out into the space between us. One bare foot, elegant and arched, came to rest near the tall stick of the gear shift. I could have reached out and touched it. I thought about it. I thought about it a lot. "You know, Sam," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a secret just for me. "You saved me back there, from the storm. Just doing my civic duty." "I think," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, holding me captive, "that a hero deserves a reward." She started to lean in, slow and deliberate, a predator moving in for the kill. The space between us shrank. 1 inch, then another. I could smell the mint on her breath mixing with her perfume. My entire body went rigid. I was done for. I was a dead man, a very, very lucky dead man. The cab of a Peterbilt is a big space, until it's not. With Veronica sitting there in my T-shirt, her long legs stretched out, the space had shrunk to the size of a phone booth. The air was hot and heavy, thick with the smell of her perfume, the rain and the unspoken thing that was crackling between us like a downed power line. The windows were completely whited out with fog. We were in our own private snow globe, and things were starting to get shaken up. Her words, "A hero deserves a reward," were still hanging in the air, echoing in my head. My brain, usually occupied with thoughts of mileage, way stations, and the structural integrity of a bacon double cheeseburger, had gone completely blank. All systems were offline, except for the one that was screaming "yes" at the top of its lungs. She leaned across the center console, that mischievous smile playing on her lips. Her eyes were dark and full of promises. "It's still awfully cramped in here," she whispered, her voice a low purr that vibrated right through me, shaking me more than the rough asphalt of I-80. "All this energy, we need more room to stretch out." My voice came out as a low growl, barely human. "The sleeper berth is bigger." Her smile widened. It was a slow, wicked, beautiful thing. A smile that could start wars. "Is that an invitation, Captain?" "It's a statement of fact," I said, trying to sound cool and detached, and failing miserably. My heart was trying to hammer its way out of my ribcage. "And a damn good idea. We can wait out the rest of the storm back there. More comfortably. Lead the way," she murmured, her eyes sparkling with victory. Getting from the front seats to the back of the truck is never a graceful process. It's a clumsy shuffle, a tangle of limbs and apologies, like trying to get past someone in a crowded movie theater aisle. But this time, it was different. It wasn't clumsy. It was a dance. A slow, deliberate, highly charged dance. I went first, turning and pushing aside the thick, heavy curtain that separated my living quarters from my office. The sleeper was dark, the only light a faint ghostly green and orange glow from the dashboard instruments filtering through. It smelled like clean laundry from the sheets I'd put on that morning, and stale coffee, my own personal scent. It was my sanctuary. I turned back and held the curtain open for her. She climbed over the console with a surprising agility, a flash of pale thigh, and the dark shadow of her underwear beneath the hem of my shirt as she swung a leg over. My mouth went bone dry. She slipped through the curtain, her bare arm brushing against my chest as she passed. The brief contact was like a brand, a jolt of heat that spread through my whole body. She was in. The curtain fell shut behind her, plunging us into a warm, intimate darkness. The world outside, The roaring storm, the flashing lights of passing trucks, it all disappeared. There was only the sound of the rain hammering on the roof of the sleeper, a relentless rhythmic drumming just inches above our heads, and our breathing, suddenly loud in the enclosed space. "Welcome to the first-class cabin," I said, my voice husky. "It's bigger than I thought," she whispered. Her silhouette moved, a graceful shadow in the gloom, and I felt the mattress dip as she sat down on the edge of my bed. I sat down next to her, the mattress groaning under my weight. We were so close our shoulders were touching, our thighs pressed together. I could feel the heat radiating off her body, a living furnace next to me. The sound of the rain was deafening, a constant, pounding beat. A flash of lightning lit up the world outside, and for a split second, the cab was illuminated in a brilliant, stark white. I saw her face, her eyes wide, her lips parted, her expression a mix of anticipation and daring. Then, darkness again. "A little jumpy?" I asked, my voice a low rumble. "A little excited," she corrected, her voice dropping even lower. She turned to face me in the dark. I couldn't see her expression, but I could feel her presence, a powerful magnetic force pulling me in. "So," she began, her voice a low, commanding murmur that sent shivers down my spine, "about that reward." Her hands found my shoulders in the dark. Her fingers were cool at first from the lingering chill, then they warmed against my skin through my shirt. She pushed, gently but firmly, with a strength that surprised me. I think the hero should lie back and relax. I went back onto the mattress without a fight, my head hitting the pillow with a soft thud. She loomed over me, a shadow against the faint light from the front. Then she was on top of me, straddling my waist, her weight settling onto me. It was the best, heaviest, most perfect cargo I'd ever carried. The worn cotton of my own T-shirt was all that was between her skin and mine, a thin, useless barrier. "You've been driving in this terrible weather," she whispered, her lips close to my ear, her breath hot. Her hair, still damp, tickled my cheek. "Handling such a heavy load, you must be tense." "A little," I managed to choke out, my throat tight. "Let me help you with that," she breathed. Her hands slid down my chest, her nails lightly scraping me. "It's time to shift gears." And then she started to move. It wasn't a wrestling match. It was a storm. She was the wind, the rain, the lightning, all in one. Her movements were a slow, powerful rhythm at first, a steady rocking that made the whole cab sway. The old Peterbilt, which had stood firm against the wind on the highway, began to move with a different kind of force, a force generated from within. The suspensions started to groan, a low, rhythmic creak, croak, creak, croak. It was a song I'd heard 1,000 times on bad roads in West Virginia, but this was a new verse. This was the sound of two bodies and a 20-ton machine, all moving as one. The rain hammered down on the roof, providing a frantic, percussive soundtrack to our movements. Lightning flashed again and again, each brilliant burst of light a strobe, freezing us in stark, intimate tableaus. Her hair was a wild halo around her head. Her face, in those brief flashes, was a mask of intense concentration and pure, unadulterated pleasure. The heat was incredible. The small space of the sleeper became a furnace, fueled by our bodies. Sweat slicked our skin, making it gleam in the flashes of lightning. The windows, which had been foggy before, were now dripping wet on the inside, condensation running in rivers down the glass, as if it were raining in the cab as well. We were completely sealed in our own private, humid world. "We're hitting some turbulence," she gasped, her voice ragged and broken. "Just hold on tight," I grunted, my hands finding her hips, my fingers digging into the soft flesh, holding on for dear life. "I know this road." The rhythm quickened. The rocking of the truck became more violent, more urgent. The suspension wasn't just groaning anymore, it was screaming in protest. The whole rig was bucking and shaking like it was trying to throw us off, like a wild horse. It was a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, all happening in a 10-by-8-foot box parked on the shoulder of I-190. It was chaos. It was madness. It was the most glorious axle-straining ride of my life. Time dissolved. There was no Chicago, no bacon, no highway. There was only the darkness, the heat, the roar of the storm outside, and the louder storm inside. There was the sound of her voice, whispering and gasping my name like a prayer. There was the steady, punishing, beautiful rhythm of the Pork Chop Express, getting the work out of its life. And then, with a final, violent shudder that shook the truck from its tires to its antenna, a tremor that felt like it might snap the chassis in two. The storm inside broke. She collapsed onto my chest, a dead weight of sweat and satisfaction. Her heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, beautiful drumbeat that slowly began to calm. We lay there, tangled in the sheets and my t-shirt, our bodies slick and cooling. The only sound was our ragged, desperate breathing and the slow, gentle creak, creak of the suspension as the truck finally settled. Outside, as if on cue, the rain was already starting to soften, the thunder rumbling off into the distance. The worst of the storm had passed, inside and out. After what could have been 5 minutes or 5 hours, Veronica stirred. She pushed herself up on her elbows, her hair, a glorious tangled mess around her face. In the dim light filtering back in as the sky brightened, I could see a wide, lazy, completely satisfied smile. "Well, Captain," she said, her voice a husky, contented drawl, "you sure know how to ride out a storm." I had a hell of a navigator. I grinned back, my voice hoarse. I reached up to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Her skin was soft and warm. The awkward dance of getting dressed was performed in reverse. But this time, it was slow, easy, and filled with lingering touches and stolen glances in the dark. She found her bare feet in the dark. I found my jeans. The storm outside had passed completely. The rain had stopped, and slivers of late-afternoon sun were starting to break through the clouds, painting stripes of light across the still fogged-up windows. She gathered her sad, wet pile of clothes from the floor of the cab. "I can't possibly put these back on," she said, holding the damp uniform up with a look of disgust. "They're still soaked." "Keep the shirt," I said, my voice full of gravelly satisfaction. "It's a souvenir." "In that case," she said, a wicked glint in her eye, "you should have one, too." She rummaged around and found a plastic grocery bag I had stashed under the seat and neatly folded her wet blouse and skirt, placing them inside. A trophy. I fired up the big diesel engine, and the world rumbled back to life. I turned the AC on full blast, and it began its noble, hopeless quest to clear the humidity from the cab. As the windows slowly started to clear, the world came back into focus. We were still on the shoulder of I-190, but the world was washed clean, glistening in the new sunlight. The rest of the drive to the airport was quiet, comfortable, the kind of silence that exists between two people who have just shared a secret, or, in our case, a Category 5 hurricane in a sleeper berth. She sat beside me, still in my shirt, her bare feet on the dashboard, looking completely at ease. I pulled the rig up to the departures curb at the United Terminal, ignoring the glares from the taxi drivers and the angry whistles from the airport cops. A giant semi-trailer doesn't exactly belong at passenger drop-off, but at that moment, I felt like I owned the place. Veronica gathered her things. She was still wearing my T-shirt and her bare feet. She looked like a college kid after a walk of shame, but she carried herself like a queen who had just conquered a small country. She turned to me, her gray eyes soft. "Well, Sam McCarty," she said, "you were my hero today." She leaned across the seat, but this time it wasn't a tease. She put one hand on the back of my neck, her fingers tangling in my hair, pulled me toward her, and gave me a kiss. It wasn't a polite thank you kiss. It was deep and wet and tasted of her and the storm we'd just been through. It was a kiss that said, "I'll remember this." She pulled back, her lips slightly swollen, her eyes shining. She handed me the plastic bag with her uniform in it. "For your collection," she whispered with a wink. Then she was gone. She opened the door, grabbed her broken suitcase, and, without even bothering to look for her shoes, padded barefoot across the wet pavement and through the sliding glass doors of the terminal, disappearing into the crowd. A beautiful barefoot angel in a trucker's T-shirt. I sat there for a full minute, a huge, goofy grin plastered on my face, feeling like an idiot who'd just hit the Powerball. My date with a cheeseburger was a distant memory. I'd just had a full-course banquet. As I put the truck in gear, the heavy shifter knocking against the plastic bag she'd left on the seat, I glanced at the passenger side. Her shoes were still on the floor mat, a pair of ruined, sensible heels. But that wasn't what caught my eye. Lying on the seat, a tiny slash of dark, silky fabric against the worn gray vinyl, was a single, black, lace-topped stocking. It must have come off in the turbulence. I let out a laugh that boomed through the cab, a deep, rolling belly laugh of pure, unadulterated victory. I picked up the stocking. It was still warm from her skin. I draped it over my rearview mirror like a war trophy, a black silk flag of conquest. I grabbed the air horn cord and gave it 2 long, triumphant blasts that echoed off the terminal building. "Brap! Brap!" People stared. A cop blew his whistle and waved his arms frantically. I didn't give a damn. I looked at the stocking dangling from my mirror, then at the bag with her uniform on the seat beside me. "Now that's what I call hauling precious cargo," I said to no one, and pulled my rig back into traffic, the king of the goddamn road.